I'd like to start this talk about towards a new welfare, evaluating the non-profit to evaluate the territory. Especially in this period of crisis, the cooperatives are essential for the survival of our society. They have increased the turnover, which is a surprising effect in this period of crisis. And when we had less and less public and private resources, we need to redevelop the relationship between public and private sector since the needs are increasing and the resources are very scarce. This is why today we'd like to focus on the goal of the welfare system, which is the people with their needs and with their ability to build and shape the future. And so it is very important to talk about evaluation because being able to evaluate is essential in order to make progress, in order to focus on the result and efficiency, in order to meet the needs of the people, because people are the ultimate goal of welfare systems. Why do we talk about evaluation? The reform of the third sector focusing on the relation between public and private sector and entities establishes criteria and modalities in order to evaluate the results achieved. As for social enterprises, they are defined as enterprises whose goal is achieving positive results. And this has proved essential in order to deal with the benefits coming from the European Union for enterprises and as for tax reliefs for them. And so, in implementing this reform, we must also evaluate the positive impacts of it. And so this is why I would like to focus on this issue tonight. Moreover, the new welfare system, in order to focus on its people, will need to find tools in order to assess whether the needs of the people have been met and if the activities actually go hand in hand with their needs. And so our focus is on the people. And so this is what we're talking about tonight. I now give the floor to Professor Giorgio Vittadini, President of the Foundation for Subsidiarity and many more. I'd like to ask him why evaluating services is so important even from a cultural point of view and what are the risks we must pay attention to. Thank you. We've always thought that there should be a pluralism of supply of services, both when it comes to state services, education, healthcare, assistance, but also as for profit-making and non-profit-making organizations in order to provide services. And for example, this is the way the Lombardy region works. And it sets an example for us all. because being able to provide competitive services with regulated competition in this sector means being able to provide high quality services in order to meet the needs of the people. And this is what Mr. Maroni will also go into detail. Many policymakers have always thought that when you create this kind of services, there is unbalanced information because users are not able to understand what is in their best interest. And so, being able to create a supply of services which is pluralistic and the user is free to choose means doing something unfair and unjust. Why do I say this? Because the services, public services of the welfare system, which are services meant for everyone. I'm not talking about electricity, for example. I'm talking about education, healthcare, culture. These services are the so-called experience goods, meaning that before providing the service, people cannot see and assess the quality of the service. For example, you can say that a teacher is a good teacher, but you cannot say that he held a very good lesson before the lesson is actually held. Or you cannot say that a surgeon is well prepared, but you cannot say that he performed a very good operation until the operation is performed. And the same thing applies to musicians, for example. And so, since I cannot evaluate the result a priori, since I cannot do so, we say that there is an unbalanced information and that I cannot provide the service. And the solution lies in the evaluation. While a few years ago, in the education sector or healthcare sector, some company indicators were enough, now people want to know if these services are good enough and they want to be able to assess if they are achieved in a good way. So this is applied to the public service, but not only. So when there is an unbalanced information, you need to have elements and tools in order to assess what's occurring. So there could also be some objections to this because we always find unbalanced information. And this was true 30 years ago because there were no tools in order to evaluate the results. But today, we can evaluate and assess the impact. So what does it mean to assess a service? It means not only assessing it before it is provided, the certificate ISO 9000, for example. But here we're talking about an assessing which happens after the service is provided. So assessing the efficiency of the service, so how many resources we've used compared to the kind of service you're providing, and efficacy, so if you've met the needs of the people. And if we can comply with these categories, we would be able to assess the services of a regional system. When, when it comes to regions and the discussion about healthcare, if GDP increases by 7%, there are regions which spend 5% and others will spend much or more. And if we assessed in a serious way, we would be able to maximize performances and the services, and being able to distinguish among regions from region to region across the country and avoid cuts. And one must say that the Lombardy region can do so thanks to the private sector and cuts over services. But over the past few years, we've been assessing the efficacy, meaning not only the output of the company, but also the outcome, which is the impact on the person. In educational terms, it means if you've educated your students or not. In terms of professional training, it means if your students are prepared for the job market or not. And I've been working in this field with the Lombardy region in the healthcare system. They issue acceptance documents displaying mortality and how many times you've been hospitalized and so on. And so this enables us to access the so-called risk adjustment, because it is not possible to compare a young person to an elderly person and so on. I'd like to give you a few figures so that you can understand how important it is to assess this kind of services. So, at the regional level, the GENES, which is the agency of the region in order to assess healthcare, is carrying out a program. And I'd like to give you a figure about C-section deliveries. So given that women are all equal and the same, these activities are less efficient because of the figures that were published. So if you go and look at the criterias, mortality rate, heart attack rate, and then you see that Lombardy region is more efficient and also has a greater efficacy, is able to take care of its patients in a better way. And we can also look at the figure of people going out of the regions. The Lombardy region has 5% of its users which come from out of Lombardy, which move to Lombardy. And this is also true in the hospitals of Lombardy region. 20% of illnesses, heart diseases, tumors, and so on. For these kind of diseases, people go to the hospital. What does this mean then? It means that if we're able to create a welfare system based on the family, which is able to choose between the possibility of a competition between private, public, and non-profit make it, we can do so. And this is also true for vocational training, because the Lombardy region, for example, issues vouchers. They used to they used to choose the entities in with no repairable funds for vocational training. Now, on the contrary, they do not choose the entities, but the student for granting the funds. And so the student goes to the entities and institutes who can prepare them, who can better prepare them. And this leads to greater efficiency. And this also has changed the university field completely. For example, as for university professors, you can go and see how many publications they've made and so on. And for example, unfortunately, in Sicily, 65% of students did not want to be assessed because they were afraid that it would be a sort of a moral condemn. So they thought that it was very bad to be assessed because it would restrict their own freedom. But actually it just means that we're able to understand if a school is working in the right direction or not. And unfortunately, there are many differences among regions in Italy. There are some regions which better educate their students and others that perform very poorly. Some regions are over the average of the OECD and others are not. And so, after assessing the services, we can say that maybe some schools can improve, have scope for improvement or not. So I can provide a tool through the welfare system in order to improve. And so we can bridge the gaps and overcome inequalities. And so to conclude, the assessment is a technical tool which enables us to improve the country as a whole. So this kind of policy, focusing on the possibility of choice of the person and focusing on the performance of companies, all of this depends on assessment. And the only differences that will exist will be a difference in smartness, because it is in their best interest to, if we enable them to choose between a good service or a bad service. Thank you.
Mr. Iacovone, CEO of Ernst & Young Italy. who will talk about the assessment of the impact. Probably he will give us more details and also some suggestions. Thank you. I would like to go back to what Mr. Vittadini was saying. That is, the first issue is, why is assessment so important today, and why is assessment, even in Italy, starting to be so topical? The first reason for this is that we have little resources, and at the same time, the needs of the population are growing, and so we need to assess. I am CEO of a company which is a profit-making company. It employs around 4,000 people. We have hired around 900 recent graduates yesterday. So for us, assessing is extremely important and being aware of our results. We also work in the public administration sector. And so the problems of efficiency and effectiveness are very important for us. 3 years ago, we created a foundation, the Ernst & Young Foundation, which helps all young people who haven't been as lucky as the 1,000 young people we hire every year. And so our employees help these young people. There are various projects, some in Milan and some in other parts of Italy. So we have some experience which enables us to talk about results. And first of all, without cooperation between the non-profit making world, which is very important, especially in the region Lombardy, between the non-profit making and the profit making world, which supports the non-profit making world, and the public administration. Public administration, according to what Mr. Vittadini was saying, and I agree with that, has to organize the projects in the region. Ernst & Young, as any other association, can choose which project to fund. So if every association in Italy decided to fund research on cancer or other initiatives, we would understand that paying for one single region is not the priority. So we need better coordination. Let's go back to impact. What is impact? What do I define as impact? If you have financed a project, for example, through European funds, for example, if you have financed a project which fights unemployment, the result can be measured according to the number of unemployed people who attend, for example, a training course. And then the value is how good the course was. How do we do this? We interview the participants about their opinion on teachers, on the didactic material, on the classrooms. But how do we measure impact? What is important when I fund with public funds a vocational training course for unemployed people? What is important? That people take part in the course? Well, yes, of course. That the teachers are good? Yes, of course. But what is fundamental is that the people who have participated in that course then can find a job. The goal of a vocational training for unemployed people is to help them find a new job. So the impact is measured on the number of the unemployed people who have taken part in that course who can find a new job after 6 months or a year. And so the impact of that course is measured according to the number of the people who have found a new job after 6 months. I have brought some slides with me, a PowerPoint presentation. And you can see them on the screen. Let's go back to the cooperation among the different stakeholders. When we ask citizens to fund a project, or companies to fund a project which has an impact on society, for example, to help cancer patients or unemployed people or children who have dropped out of school. When we ask people or companies to pay, to donate their money, to use their money, those citizens and companies, of course, want to know what they are investing in. And so it is important that the public, the private sector cooperate. It is okay to ask them for money, but at the same time, we have to tell them, it is important to tell them what has been done with that money. Otherwise, the private sector will no longer provide money for to solve social issues. And so all these elements have to be put together. And it is also important that all those who are providing money then have a certain return. And what is this return? The fact that that project has had an impact, for example, that the number of unemployed people find jobs, the number of unemployed people drops and people find new jobs, that children who have dropped out of school go back to school. This is what helps us assess what has been done and improve our reputation, because otherwise people will stop giving us money. So, what are the partnerships which were successful in the world? On the slide, you can see a very interesting portal which is called TED. The website is www.ted.org. It is a platform where you can find the best speeches in the world. The guy you see on the slide is called Toby Eccles. He tells a story which took place in the United Kingdom when the Minister for Justice introduced a bond, basically asking citizens to fund a project. The goal of the project was that of reducing the number of former inmates who go back to jail. So the Minister for Justice issued this bond and told the people who bought the bond that if after 6 years the number of former inmates going back to jail had dropped by 7.5%, as Minister for Justice, I will pay you between 10 and 13% of interest on what you paid. Otherwise, you will get nothing back. So people who had decided to use their money wanted to check that that project was being successful. And so they made sure that former inmates found jobs after they left jail. And so that was a success story. The impact goal was clear: cutting the number of former inmates who went back to jail. It was a very clear goal, it was easy to measure. People had invested their money and then they had earned something on it. The second example is the example of Michael Porter. He's a guru of the private sector, a guru of company management, and he believes that for companies it is convenient to invest in the social sector. He showed that if a company invests on the region, on the area, has a positive return for its employees, for the company, and for its customers. Once again, how do we measure this impact? Of course, when you invest in an area, you want to see a tangible effect on that area. At the beginning, I said that there are little resources and growing needs. What happens when there aren't enough resources and growing needs? From a political point of view, but also in the private sector, also in my sector, the policymakers or the entrepreneurs tend to look at the short-term results. And this is what causes problems for the following generations, because the trend is looking at what is happening now and not investing in the following generation, not investing in the future. Investing in the future is a duty which every one of us has. We are here, we are where we are today because someone before us has decided to invest in our future. And so we have the duty to invest in the next generations. And this is another fundamental point. Assessing how good a project is when compared to another allows me to see the long-term impact of that project as well. And so it allows me to focus on many different options. So, if we agree on the fact that it is important to assess an impact, then we have to be clear on the indicators we use to measure that impact. Today's discussion is focused on welfare, on prosperity. Prosperity is a very complicated issue. The man you see in the slide is called Simon Kuznets. He is the one who invented the GDP, which is the indicator we use to measure the prosperity of a country. He invented it in 1929 after the Big Depression because he wanted to be able to assess whether the measures which had put into practice after the crisis had a positive impact on the economy. On page 7 of his documents, he wrote that the GDP is not an indicator that we can use to measure the level of welfare of a society. So indicators have to be concise, they have to be sophisticated, but also adequate to measure the well-being of a society. If you go on the internet, for example, if you use Google and you write assessment models, you will find around 50 assessment models. The models used to assess the impact of a project on an area or in a field is around 50. Every model has positive or negative aspects, but they are all valid. They are all focusing on improvement. The most famous is the SROI, the social return on investment, which measures the social return on the investments of $1 which is invested. The most used model is the SROI, and we decided to create a new model. It is a systemic model. This model takes into account all various aspects, for example, impact on the environment, the element of innovation of a project, personal well-being, social relationships, which are very important because with an aging population, relationships are extremely important to make sure that there is well-being in society. So if a project promotes the development of relationships among people, it is a very positive thing. Then employment, the cultural heritage. In the slide, you can see all the 12 topics which reunite all 100 indicators we used. And then we are able to determine whether a project is better than another one in terms of the goal we had chosen to achieve. For example, the project you see in the slide has a very good impact on the people who are very poor. It has a 9.8% of impact on the needs, the people who are not in education, employment or training. The project analyzed in the slide has an impact on the people aged between 25 and 64 and so on. So if the priority for our area is that of reducing the number of people who are living in poverty or the number of the needs, then it is clear that project A, as you can see in the slide, is better than project B. This is a tangible example, and it is a tangible way of measuring whether a project is better than another project in terms of the impact. Let's compare countries, for example, Germany and Italy. What are the priorities for Germany and what are the priorities for Italy? Of course, the priorities for the two countries, as you can easily imagine, are completely different. The top priority for Italy is that of helping people who are very extremely poor, of reducing the number of needs, improving patent regulations, and so on. For Germany, top priorities are education and training. The second priority is education and training in ICT and among people aged between 25 and 64. So why are we trying to identify the priorities of an area? Because it helps us understand whether a project has met the needs of that specific area or whether the project does not have an impact on those priorities. And I would like to go back once again to what Mr. Vittadini was saying. Once I have defined the priorities of an area, what is the most important thing to do? That of using the profit, non-profit making, and the public administration sector to address those priorities. How do I do this? I do it by measuring before the start of a project what kind of an impact that project can have, for example, on unemployment. And once the project is over, I can measure, I can assess how and if those projects have reduced unemployment, the dropout rate, or the number of former inmates who go back to jail. And the model can help us do this. In this slide, you can see the y-axis, where you see the priorities, and the x-axis, where you see the priorities of an organization. For example, for the Ernest Young Foundation. It is important to know the priorities of organizations if we want them to give us their money. For example, if we want the Pirelli Foundation to give us their monies. And so we have to take into account the priorities of an organization and also the priorities of an area. And if we can reconcile those priorities, then it will be easier to create projects which meet the needs of both the area and organizations. In the upper right quadrant, you see the projects which meet the needs both of the area and of the organization. So we have to assess the impact on prosperity. We have to technically help in the provision of funds. We have to evaluate the policies and the programs of public administration, and also helping citizens assess whether what politicians have promised has actually been made. This is a very controversial aspect, and I would like to conclude my speech with a sentence by Keynes, who says, "It is better to be vaguely right than precisely wrong." This means that it is better to try and assess and make mistakes than not even trying to assess. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Giuseppe Guerini, President of Fede Solidarietà and of the cooperative Ecosviluppo. As president of the largest European organization of social cooperatives and as president of social cooperative, could you tell us how assessing the impact can help this sector, and if you could make some examples, some positive examples about this? Thank you, first of all, for inviting me to the meeting. It's always a pleasure for me. And every time I speak, I think it's important to contextualize my thoughts in the set of the meeting. So, what is this lack of which people are feeling in terms of welfare? Unlikely what people expected in the previous years, and in the light of all of the development that we've experienced, inequalities keep growing, and this was one of the aims of the welfare systems, reducing inequalities while they keep growing instead. And the other goal was meeting the needs of people, which keep growing instead, despite all the progress and the aging population. All of this calls for a great social demand, and so it is important to coordinate all, all of the resources that we have, starting from Michael Porter, who Jacoboni quoted. We need to reinvent capitalism. I believe that we must reinvent welfare systems completely. Our welfare systems have not grown since the last century. It's not that everything has stood still, but our welfare system comes from a very old model, and we must try and reinvent this welfare system, taking the examples of other systems. The entrepreneurial system, the capitalistic system have revolutionized our society. Just think, for example, of the how a telephone was at the beginning of the 20th century, and think about our smartphones today. The concept is totally different. So when we are dealing with disabled people, non-self-sufficient people, psychiatric patients, we use an approach which has improved the care of these people, but could not create a system in order to address the challenge. So, what Vittadini defined as the imbalance of information, which means not enabling people to understand and assess what they actually need. These are defensive systems. We need instead people that we want people to be involved even in the assessment of the services that they need. I'd like to tell you a provocative thing. In the welfare sector and the third sector, we've made much progress because today, for example, as for psychiatric patients, we've improved the care of these people. But we're having a hard time helping people get involved in the process, which is something that people who invented smartphones and so on were able to do because there is a great imbalance of information between me and an engineer who designed a smartphone. So in the welfare system, we've kept increasing the imbalances of information, and so the person that stands in front of us turns into a patient. And so my question is, do social workers have a, a heart that is too big and think that it is enough to provide just a procedure in order to meet the needs of the people? And so if we feel the lack inside our heart, we think that filling out a form is just enough. And so this is why we need to be able to create quality elements in systems of the indebtedness and other systems helped improve professionality. But just think that a few weeks ago, the president of the Italian Social Security said that most measures are intended for people that would not need them. And, and this happens because we do not assess what is happening and we do not go and see why things are happening that way. And so we should go in this direction, and each and every one of us should do so in their field of expertise. For example, what does the third sector do in order to assess the results of their projects? We're also aware of the fact that it is very difficult to represent in indicators the main questions, the main needs of the people. People need to engage in a relationship, need to feel trust, need to identify themselves with other people. And so filling out a form is not enough. And it is not enough just to stick to my contract, for example, if there is someone standing in front of me who is asking for something different. Maybe you just want to engage in a relationship, you just want to be recognized as a person. This has also happened in the Lombardy region, and later on, Mr. Maroni will tell us more about it. And I do not say this in ironical terms. The Lombardy region is the paradise of subsidiarity, great associations, voluntary workers, and they rank first in this field in Europe. But even in the Lombardy region, we had great experimenting periods which then stabilized. And so we run the risk of standing still. So what do assessment what is assessment for? Since we focus on the compliance of our services, we do not focus enough on the innovation that we can provide in regions such as the Lombardy regions where there is great potential. The Lombardy region is carrying out three great measures. One is the healthcare reform, which is very interesting, especially because they take care of families and benefits for families and for healthcare. But I hope that there will be a little more humanity in the healthcare system. The second great measure that the Lombardy region is about to take is the measure about family assistant, family carers, caregivers. And we run the risk of thinking that we are not going to need the welfare system, but this is not true because sooner or later we will all need it. And then when we work in the welfare system and we have in front of us a user with his needs, we need to be aware of the fact that we need to identify with that person and with their humanity. And on the other hand, it is also true that when there's a social problem, we always think that maybe the state will meet this need, or the European Union, or someone else. But what we should do is asking ourselves what we can do in order to address the challenge. Because this is the core of the philosophy of the third sector. And the other danger is the danger of privatization. Just think of the caregivers' situation. Families felt abandoned in this and they solved their problems by using caregivers. So, in order to address all of these problems, it is important to assess the projects. And then the Lombardy region has committed itself to fight against extreme poverties, but Mr. Maroni will tell us more about it. In Italy, we always say that we are behind other countries in this, but we forget to say that Italy spends 40 billion euro per year in this kind of interventions and measures, but people say that they are allocated for people who do not need them. And so this is why we must talk to people and assess projects, because people trust you only if they see results. And It is very important to restore trust. And so this is why we need to do tangible things, things that can be seen and assessed. And in this regard, I believe that the the cooperatives and no-profit making sector can help us address this problem, because just like the entrepreneurial spirit of men helped us make a lot of progress, meeting needs of the people and making profits and profiting from it. Today, the non-profit making sector is showing us that it is possible to provide services without profiting from them, but still meeting the needs of the people. And so, if we understand this concept, we will be able to deeply reform the welfare systems. And we will be able to do so only if we're able to apply this entrepreneurial spirit in order to organize subsidiarity and the non-profit making sector, in order to have people who feel responsible for what they do and who commit themselves in this. So this is the real challenge that we're faced with. So why do we need to improve our assessment systems? We need to do this because even in this third sector, we've created an ideological approach, namely thinking that a non-profit making organization is automatically a good organization, a fair organization, but it's not always like this. So this is not enough. We must be able to show that the measures that we take, the services that we provide are efficient. And so I'm happy to see that in Italy we're talking again about social impact. But there is also a negative aspect to it, because as third sector workers, we had to wait for business people to understand that they could invest in this sector in order to be able to assess projects. But we are not working in order to help business people to profit from this. We're working in order to meet the needs of the people, because otherwise we run the risk of ignoring why we're doing what we're doing. And as Mrs. Poletto said, it is important to assess projects. There is also a money situation, though. It is very expensive to run assessment systems. This is true. We could try and cooperate with business people in order to create assessment systems, and this could be the first way to address this problem. On the other hand, we must also acknowledge that there are some assessment activities which are quite reasonable and they are very easy to carry out. They are not expensive, and I'd like to show you a few slides relating to the cooperatives that I preside. By spending 2,500 euros, we have used a system which we did not create. The University of Brescia developed it. It is called Valores, and it assessed the economic value of the people that work and find a job. The cooperative works in the environmental sector. The assessment system that we've developed together with the University of Brescia is based on this formula. The formula represents the the value of work and the economic value, even in terms of taxation, and then we this minus the fiscal benefits of the cooperative. In 2014, the cooperative found a job for 102 people, disabled people, psychiatric patients, people that got out of jail, and drug addicts, and 35 people who were suggested by social services, the mayor of the town, because maybe they were unemployed and they were elderly people, did not receive any pension, and so they needed a job because they had a family and so on. So these kind of people, 102 people in 2013, and with this system, we calculated that the economic value in favor of the public administration was accounted for 214,000 euro per year, and the cooperative was able to save 2,000 euro per year. We've created benefits which accounted for 598,000 euro, minus the tax reliefs of the cooperative, which account for 300,000 euro approximately per year. Thank you, Mr. Maroni, for your help in providing the details. So we have a lot of benefits and tax tariffs accounting for 300,000 euros per year. So through the services we provide, around 20 services in tenders and in the free market. So we were able to show the effectiveness of a company who is able to meet the needs of the people and to make profit. And so we prevented people from saying that there were weird reasons behind all this. And I think that every cooperative should apply and use this model because it provides very interesting results. Where this where did all this money go to? 36% in favor of municipalities, 16% to the Lombardy region, and 48% to the state. All of these figures vary depending on the kind of people for which we find a job. Because, for example, we work with a lot of people who've just got out of jail. And so this is just to show you how with little money we can build an assessment service, an assessment system. It is possible to do it, and at the end of the day, it is not a condemn, but it allows us to meet the needs of the people. Thank you.
Allora, Presidente Maroni, penso...
Thank you. President Baroni, I believe there are a lot of ideas, so I give the floor to you. Good evening. Thank you for your invitation. I believe that after the words of Mr. Vittadini, the very good words he said about Region Lombardy, I am tempted to stop there. However, I would like to say a few things. We have been addressing the problems of the welfare system because the welfare system is important. There are many people in Lombardy, elderly people, disabled people, who need the welfare system. And so helping the people who have specific needs is a priority for us. We have to learn how to take action, and we have done so by following the suggestions which have come from this round table. And we focused on some principles. The importance of people, which means freedom of choice in the healthcare system, in the education system, in the training system, in all public sectors. And as far as the education system goes, the region Lombardy has a long tradition, for example, support for families. This year, 28,000 people will receive benefits. We have allocated around 27 billion euros, and each person will receive around 900 euros, because we believe it is important for families to send the children to the best school in their opinion. State-owned schools or private schools. Very often private schools provide very good education by spending less than state-owned schools. And I have attended state-owned schools. My children have attended state-owned schools. However, what private schools do in the region Lombardy is extremely important. Otherwise, the region Lombardy would not be able to provide this level of education to all young people in Lombardy. So freedom of choice means also being able to choose whether I want to go to Niguarda, to the San Raffaele hospital if I want to be treated. I'm talking about the healthcare system. And this without taking into consideration the income of a family. Everyone has to be able to choose the best place for them to be treated. And then we have passed the reform of the healthcare system. I will tell you something more about this. And the most important thing is the assessment of goals. Assessing goals means providing better information to people. Mr. Vittadini before was talking about customer satisfaction. We have introduced an element of customer satisfaction in the new reform. It is, of course, a very complicated aspect because it is hard to assess customer satisfaction in a hospital. I can decide to use this tool in a scientific way because I want to try and assess the customer satisfaction in an objective way. And this is not easy to do, but we want citizens to be very well informed. The system of assessing the results is useful to us to organize the service better, to recognize skills and merit. And once we have identified best practices, we have to be able to apply them to other situations. Standard costs have to be used, in my opinion, in all regions. Otherwise, we will continue to perform cuts across the board. And regions who are doing a good job will not be able to continue to do so. There is a survey by Confcommercio which has been published in July, and it says that if the whole of Italy did what Lombardy is doing, we would be able to save 23 billion euros. The Court of Accounts has assessed the way the region Lombardy uses its public money, and it has seen that we are doing a good job. So if the government truly applied the standard costs model to all regions, we would be able to save, Italy would be able to save 23 billion euros. If we consider that all prescription charges in the region Lombardy are around 500 million euros, and if these costs were the same for our regions, we would be able to cut all prescription charges. I like calling the reform of the healthcare system as an evolution of the healthcare system. I did not want to reform the healthcare system. I wanted to make it evolve. And to do this, we focused on making sure that people could choose freely. And we also focused on the way society is managing patients. According to estimates, in the next 20 years, there will be around 3.5 million people aged over 65. So, of course, the needs are different, and we need to understand that the way of treating people will also change. And this is why we decided to put together the healthcare system and the social security system, not only at the regional level, but also at a local level. Hospitals will become very important centers, not only for operations, but in general it would be possible for patients to choose where to go. The problem now is that patients very often have to move from one hospital to the other, and patients are left alone during the recovery process. So if the healthcare system has to take care of the patient from the moment the patient enters hospital to the moment where he leaves the hospital. And so we need to change the culture itself. We have to convince people to change their behavior, to change the way they do things. And so I believe our reform is something which was very positive. Our goals were an improvement in the integration between healthcare system and social security system. On this slide, you see revolution of hospitals. Hospitals will have to become centers which help patients during the recovery process, the whole recovery process. In Milan, the Children's Center was created. Then we have to increase checks, which means setting up an assessment system. And it means that our region wants to be assessed. And so that's why we created an assessment agency, which is independent, which has nothing to do with the region. It has nothing to do with me. And so the agency can tell me if I'm doing a good job or a bad job. It is in my own interest to know whether I'm working well or not. I don't have any interest in helping my friends, maybe supporters of the Inter team will not receive many help from me, but anyway, I am ready to help everyone. And this agency will be ready by the end of the year, and I want it to be a truly independent agency. And I would like to help to ask today's guests to help me in this, because I agree with what the other guests have said. So we have to increase checks, we have to cut costs as well. How do we do this? In a very easy way. there are 46 tenders in the healthcare systems in region Lombardy. And we want them to become part of the ARCA, which is a central agency for tenders. We want to make best use of the economies of scale, and in this way we will manage to save various millions of euros, around 400 millions of euros. And these euros will not be used to cut debts. They will be used in the healthcare system, for example, to reduce the number of prescription charges and to help people who really need our help. And so this is why our savings will reduce the number of prescription charges, waiting lists, and nursing home fees. So the first step was healthcare system. The second step is the social security system. We have more money than other regions. And the fact that we have more money is not only thanks to what I have done. The people before me had done a very good job, and we were able, without incurring debts, to find around 250 million euros, which in July we have allocated, after the budget law in July, to finance what can be seen as an income support. It can be seen as a social inclusion support. So we're talking about 250 million euros, which will be used until December 2016 to provide income support. We have also used the Social European Fund. It has been financed by the European Union, and it is part of the 2020 strategy. The region Lombardy has received around 60% more money than other areas because we are able to use European funds properly. And I would like to use 970 million euros from the Social European Fund and those 250 million euros from the budget of the region to improve the healthcare system and the social security system, especially the social security system. I would like to set a good example in terms of welfare system. For the region Lombardy, people are the important thing, and everything we do is at the service of families and people, not the opposite. How do we do this? There are two big fields. First of all, how do we find this money? How do we allocate this money? Do we give benefits to everyone? No. I have been the Minister for Welfare, and I believe we have to focus on active policies. When I talk about the autonomy income as it is defined, I'm talking about an income support. I'm talking about helping people who need our help. So the most important thing is employment policy, the education policy, the training policy. And I wanted the councillor responsible for education to also be responsible for training and for employment. The second aspect is social cohesion. For example, it makes no sense to provide training courses to a 70-year-old person in order to ensure that there is social cohesion. For example, volunteering work has to be at the service of elderly people. Then housing policies are extremely important. Then we need other policies to cut prescription charges and waiting lists. And the fifth important point is fighting malnutrition. We have until mid-September to set up these policies. Of course, any contribution is welcome because I want to spend the money of the people in Lombardy well. The second thing we have to do is making sure that not only the region is using the money, the region has to decide how to use the money. But we are very lucky in Lombardy because there are a number of non-profit organizations which can really help us do a good job. We are the region with the highest number of non-profit organizations. There are 7,734 non-profit organizations, volunteering organizations, organizations which provide support to families. I'm talking about 7,734 organizations in which hundreds and thousands of volunteers work. And I want to give the resources of our local government to these organizations so that they can make best use of them. Of course, we must take into consideration the importance of the effectiveness and the assessment. And I am convinced of the fact that non-profit organizations and that volunteers are the real stakeholders who know very well what the needs of the society are. In October, we will start with the first public tenders. However, the direction I would like to take is involving the non-profit organization because these organizations are providing public services. And I hope that the bill for a reform of the volunteer sector will have positive effects. If we have a national register for these organizations, then we risk having negative consequences because how many of these 7,734 organizations will also decide to be part of the national register? How much time will this process take? I hope that the government takes into consideration these aspects and does not set up a reform which destroys systems which are already working very well, for example, in the region Lombardy. We have also carried out a survey in Lombardy, and 88% of the citizens of Lombardy are in favor of this income support measure. They don't know very well what this measure is about. However, they like the idea that people who are in need receive our help. And this increases the responsibility of the local government. We are ready to increase our resources and to use them properly. Of course, we don't want to let the people of Lombardy down, and we will not do it. Thank you.
Allora, chiudiamo.
So I'd like to thank our guests. It, tonight, they reminded me of what the President of the Republic said in his message to the meeting about what we all need to do in the pluralism of conditions and cultures, since we will all benefit from it, starting from the leading class and the political class. So thank you all. Thank you, everyone. And Speaking of non-profit making organizations, this is also the case of the Meeting Foundation, and so they also need our support. And it is my pleasure to launch the fundraising campaign. There are a lot of stands all over the fairground where you can donate